Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast daily. It is a Tuesday, and it's a normal one. And that Bill Landis we both get to go back, but Bill Landis gets to give his insight and predictions and questions and insight, analysis, evaluations, hopes, and dreams for what we learn from Ryan Day on a Tuesday in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. That is, of course, the one and only Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. Ohio State is going to have Ryan Day available today, and then tomorrow is more of not a full team, but expecting a large array of starters, sort of a team media day on campus before they have one down in Atlanta in a couple of weeks' time. So the floor is open for Bill to go out and get a bunch of information. I'm going to try too, but I wrote about the questions that I have on my mind on Monday at ohiostate.rivals.com. This show is about Bill.
When did that happen, by the way? I feel like when we first set this out, it was like, oh, we're going to talk about the questions we have. And now it's just like Bill's questions. It's like, what? Well, it's a lot of pressure. You know what I mean?
I think people just care more about what's on your mind because you're much more inquisitive than me. You know, you have better questions. I mean,
that's certainly not true.
All right. Well, I mean, but I just write mine already, and I just feel silly saying the same ones over.
I think maybe what I don't like is the handful of times we do this where I don't get the chance to read your questions beforehand, which is what's happening now. So I feel like I'm in the dark a little bit. I have questions. I have many questions. I'm a little at a loss for like what we should be talking about now. And actually, I'd be curious on your thoughts on that too, because I think a strong suit of yours is like knowing when to push the buttons. And I think there's a pretty robust NIL conversation I think we need to have with Ryan Day. Is Tuesday the right time to do that? Now that we have resolution on Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think there's probably a conversation to be had about that and how that was handled and how it shook out, whatever they're willing to share, which I would assume is probably not very much. Is now the right time for that? Or is that more of an off-season thing? It's like, because they're preparing to play a playoff semifinal. It's like, I would love to talk about that, but there are these like ancillary things out there where it's like, well, should we kind of divert course and go into this, or should we talk about the Bulldogs and Georgia and the Peach Bowl? Like, I have questions about all of it, but I'm struggling at the moment to know exactly which direction to go.
Yeah, I think I tried to make this point to some people last week. I think that in some ways Ohio State, like taking last week off from all media, did a disservice to the program on a number of fronts. And it was shifting the conversation away from the game and giving some documented evidence that this team is excited for the playoff, which we know that they are. But it was another full week where we didn't have anything to talk about except looking back at November 26th. The secondary part of that is some of the things that you're talking about. You know, Gene Smith put out his statement last Thursday. Maybe Ryan Day would have, I think there is definitely a part of Ryan Day that wants to talk about what is going on with name, image, and likeness and recruiting. That seems like it would have been a much better time. There wasn't a great sense of urgency. They weren't in the game plan phase yet for getting ready for the Peach Bowl. That would have been another opportunity to change the conversation with someone who's intimately involved in all that stuff. Plus you have, you could get into Kevin Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Keenan Bailey. There were a lot of things that had to be addressed. And part of what today's press conference is supposed to be about is accepting an invitation to the Peach Bowl. And they will want, that conversation to be about the college football playoff. But for Ohio State, it seems pretty unlikely that game on, December 13th is going to trump all these other things that have gone on in the last 2 weeks or 8 days, or I don't even know at this point how long it's been since Ryan Day spoke, but they had a lot of things that they needed to address. And I don't know that the PR strategy throughout this entire year has been the best that it could have been. And that's not about Jerry Emig. That's the school as a whole has made puzzling decisions about how to handle this. And sometimes they don't love it, but it's getting in front of a microphone can be a significant thing for your program. And it doesn't take a lot of time or effort.
It doesn't. I think the calendar is heavily influential in that as well. Like Ryan Day was on the road recruiting all last week. They were in New York for the Heisman Trophy with CJ.
Yep.
In past years, I guess they would have been in Atlanta or wherever for the college football award show that I guess is a little different now than it has been in years past. So like there's all these things that are sort of getting jammed into a pretty short period of time. Now you add like the transfer portal craziness and NIL on top of that. That we need to talk about. And also, since the last time we talked to Ryan Day, as you said, they lost their offensive coordinator and made a decision to replace him on the staff. And like I guess you can say like, well, you talked to Ryan Day on Sunday when they got into the playoff. Like that's true, but like they got into the playoff that day. what else? Like, you want to talk about that, right? Like they just lost to Michigan, and they're like have this opportunity for redemption. Like of course you're gonna want to talk about that in that moment. It's just like, and it's. Maybe people are reading this like rolling their eyes, like, what are you talking about? What are you complaining about? And I think maybe the idea is like we just want to make sure we're setting ourselves up to get the best possible information for you all who listen to this. So like a lot of kind of time and place, thought and strategy go into like when is the appropriate time to ask a question to get the best possible answer, so that you're not all asking us like, hey, what's up with this and this. Like we all have the same questions too. It's just I think we've been doing it long enough to know like, hey, if I ask this question, like it's not going to get an answer, and I just wasted everyone's time.
Right. Yeah, we like to work, right? I think people have, raised this topic on OhioState.Rivals.com. Like this is our livelihood. We are around Ohio State every single day, and I can't speak for everyone, but I know that you and I want to do the best possible job that we can, and we pride ourselves on doing so. And part of that requires being able to get information without press conferences, and we certainly do our best to do that. But the other part of it is being around there to provide the rest of the coverage that this fan base wants, because we know that there's a bottomless appetite for it. And I think sometimes this program has done itself no favors by the way that it handles that. And look, they would be one of the most interesting and provocative programs in the country, whether we had this job or not. But I do think a big part of it is that you have to keep those people engaged. And I personally didn't want to spend all of last week continuing to talk about the Michigan game, because I do think that this program is leaning into that second shot at life and new perspective by getting a mulligan into the playoff. And I was ready to stop talking about what happened in that game and move on to, even if it's, signing day stuff or the transfer portal, at least things that are looking towards the future, but definitely what that roster, how healthy it's going to be, what it's going to look like on New Year's Eve, because for as important as the 2023 roster is, this team's playing for a national championship opportunity in whatever it is, 19 days. So
yeah,
that you should want your fan base engaged by that.
I think so too. I don't know. Maybe there's a hard decisions to make. I'm not sure. It seems rather cut and dry to me. I guess like if I were a fan too, or if I'm talking to a fan, I would say like all of the questions that you had coming out of the Michigan game, I think were largely very valid and do deserve some introspection and some answers. Frankly, I just like it gets tabled. They'll be there after the playoff too. Like they're not going to go away. The context can change tremendously depending on what Ohio State does here in the next two games. But those questions are just sort of tabled for the moment. So I guess I want to make the point, like we're not ignoring all of that stuff. I think there's some valid questions that stem from that game, but there's also valid questions that could be answered on December 31st. And maybe that is one of my kind of prevailing thoughts in my head at the moment. If we're to kind of narrow in a little more on the task at hand for Ohio State, it's maybe what Ryan Day thinks of the offensive performance on some of these stages. And he was asked a little bit about that on Sunday. Tim May, I believe it was, just sort of like threw the point totals at Ryan for some of these bigger games. And Ryan didn't really talk about it in a meaningful way. He just sort of said like, well, you got to score points to win these games. It's like, yeah, of course you do. But, if you look at the last two Michigan games and his first college football playoff appearance, this is not applicable to the second time when they pantsed Clemson in that game and it was like the best game he coached. But the other time he was there and his last two games against Michigan, the offense has missed the mark a little bit, and particularly has just not scored enough, has not fared well enough in the red zone, to be more specific. Plenty of yards, like nothing alarming there. They moved the ball, they just didn't score. So like, without asking him to divulge the game plan, I do wonder if he'd be willing to be maybe a little bit reflective on what's been missing in some of those games, so that Ohio State can kind of maximize its offensive output against Georgia.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds, and I guess both of them can be correct. There have certainly been 3 or 4 examples throughout this year where I've thought like, and you and I have both had these conversations where you more with the running game and me maybe lack of creativity overall. There was just a predictable flow, predictable vibe, predictable, just flat out predictable nature to the Ohio State offense at times. And it didn't seem like Ryan Day was maximizing the play calling to the level that we'd seen previously. I don't necessarily think that was the problem against Michigan. I do tend to agree that looking back on it and the plays that, whether it was execution of catching the football, execution of putting the football on Cade Stover, whether that was costly penalties from the offensive line and trying to go tempo, like I did think that the Michigan game came down more to execution than some of the other things. I think there is a part that's we've talked about that's true, that maybe head coaches aren't able to be the offensive play caller and win national championships. That's, again, something that could change on December 31st and beyond. But the evidence up to this date suggests that it's not very likely. It hasn't happened in the college football playoff era. I don't think that was the problem on November 26th. So I don't expect any. It's definitely not going to change for the Georgia game. Ryan Day is going to call the plays. We know that they're not going to, scrap all of that. But, and it's also not to say that that was just a complete one-off bad day performance from the team. Like they've done a lot of things that put themselves in a position to win, and they didn't execute them. So I think that's why it's hard for him to answer, hard for Ryan Day to answer those questions when he was asked about it a week ago, because he probably feels like there are some things that he didn't do well enough. He also feels like maybe that the overall body of work, the spots that he put them in, should have been good enough for Ohio State to win.
Yeah.
And became kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think back. Like, I don't recall in like the 2019 Fiesta Bowl thinking like, oh man, their play calling was terrible. It was like J.K. Dobbins like slipped one time and like dropped a touchdown pass, I think on a wheel route another time. I think what I was like critical of in those moments is like, okay, you called up a good play, it didn't work, and then you just decided to kick a field goal from inside the 10-yard line.
Right.
And that's happened at other times too. It's not so much I guess the action or the immediate action. Sometimes it's the response from Ryan Day that I feel like is a little lacking. Maybe he gives up on things a little too much, or he's aggressive to a point and then maybe doesn't take it quite to the level that it needs to get to make sure that you are scoring touchdowns in games like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think you make good points. It's like, the stuff against Michigan this year, I think, was largely well drawn up. But then also, I feel like I could ask a question like, why aren't you drawing those up for Marvin Harrison Jr.? Why are you drawing them up for Xavier Johnson and Cade Stover and not your best player? So there's
or kicking the field
sides.
goal, the fake punt.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two sides of that coin, and like the execution stuff people don't want to hear, but it's real. It happens. I think all of it largely is a reflection of the head coach. Like, you have to get your guys in the mental space to execute in those situations, but you can't go out there and catch the football for them. So that happens too. So I don't want to ask that question and then make it come off as like, I think there's one simple answer and it's Ryan Day needs to be better. I think it's more complicated and nuanced than that. But some of these big games, I think like his decision making has been a bit puzzling to me. But I don't think he'd cop to that either, at least not in a press conference before the Peach Bowl. But
it'd be amazing if he did.
Yeah, it was like, just my bad, guys. It was me. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. I promise. I don't think that'll be the case. But sometimes it's just sort of like picking his brain on stuff like that to kind of get a feel for where he's at with things. But going into a game like this, I can't imagine he's going to be all that willing to divulge his thoughts on trying to beat what might be the best defense in the country.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Last week you talked about how Ohio State could try to defend best tight end tandem in the country. So we've covered that. We've talked a little bit about Mayan Williams. I don't know if maybe we spent enough time with what decision Ohio State is going to have to arrive to probably quickly. I don't know that they could wait till December 26th when they get to Atlanta and be like, well, Matthew Jones is going to be a game time decision. I don't think that would work personally. So we're probably not going to get a clear answer on that on Tuesday, although maybe a better chance of that on Wednesday when more of the team is around. But what they expect to do at guard, I think, is probably a pretty big deal because going into that game as a game time decision for Matthew Jones and then trying both Enoch Vamahi and Josh Fryer, I don't think did Ohio State any favors either.
It didn't. I guess the one good thing that came out of that is that if Matthew Jones can't play, then like I just think it has to be Josh Fryer. And Enoch, he was fine. Like, and he had been good prior to that. I just felt like he got exposed maybe a little bit, in particular like one play where he was trying to pass protect and like CJ almost got sacked and threw an incomplete pass, I think, to Xavier Johnson. I just felt like Josh Fryer had a little bit better body of work in that game. And if you weren't totally sure who the right guy was going into it, I think you probably should have come out of it feeling pretty good about who would be that guy going into that situation. But I agree with you. It can't be like touch and go when you're in Atlanta. Like, oh, let's see if Matt can practice. It's like, no, I think you need to know probably sometime this week, next week, so you can start to build that body of work for Josh Fryer if it is him. I don't know. I don't know what, like, when we saw Matthew Jones on crutches after the Maryland game, I thought to myself, like, oh, well, his season must be over. There's a long time between the Michigan game and this game on December 31st for him to heal, assuming it wasn't anything serious. But then it's the question of like, well, if he can play, at what level is he? Is a 70% Matthew Jones better than a presumably 100% Josh Fryer? Like, I don't know the answer to that, but that is a major lingering question going against this defensive line and Jalen Carter in particular, because I can promise you one thing: if there's any uncertainty up front, that's where Jalen Carter is going to line up.
Yeah, and that's why I think you have to make those decisions as soon as you're able if you're Ohio State. And look, the part that's in the back of my mind is like Matthew Jones has left no doubt about his toughness. The fact that he was even able to go warm up and try to be a game time decision against Michigan was stunning to me based on what I had seen 7 days prior with him hobbling out on crutches with a walking boot on his leg. I thought, well, that he's finally reached his limit because he'd been hurt all year. The foot injury, he had it going into week one. He had on the clown shoe on his and had worn that all year. Like, it was incredible pain tolerance and remarkable toughness, and all of that is true. But now there's a different dynamic at play, which, as you said, you've seen Josh Fryer do this in a couple games. Enoch Vamahi's come off the bench. Maybe the pecking order there is in their mind Jones, Fryer, then Vamahi. But if there's a clear difference in the health between number one and number two, this is probably a game where you lean towards being healthier. And if you have to go to an emergency situation and break that glass for the toughness of Matthew Jones, maybe do that. But it's hard for me to sit here right now knowing that foot situation that he had all year was probably not healed from November 26th through December 31st. I think it's probably going to require something more than just time off for that to get right. If that's lingering there, plus what he dealt with after the Maryland game, that makes it hard for me to envision. But we'll see as the week goes on, and then next week, and then even a couple open viewing periods in Atlanta once we get that. So that'll be a real nice treat. Yeah.
I'll you'll have to FaceTime me.
I will.
So I can watch the practice and see what's going on the offensive line. One other guy, I guess it's not an injury situation, but one other guy that I am interested in asking Ryan Day about is Dallin Hayden, and just why the thought process of inserting Chip Trayanum into the Michigan game when he really hadn't played all year. Not that he played well. Like I guess in the end that wasn't a bad decision because Chip did play well, and I could probably make the argument maybe we should have ran him a little more in that game. But why, like, Dowling, what did he get, 2 carries in that game? He just like disappeared from the plan after running for like 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns in back-to-back weeks, just looking really good, and like he gave the offense another gear. So I found that puzzling, and we have not really had a chance to address that yet with Ryan Day. So I'm hoping maybe that comes up on Tuesday.
Plus, I'm sure he'll be really excited about some of the social media accounts posting rumors about Tennessee offering huge amounts of money to Dallin Hayden to get him to enter the transfer portal. I bet he'll really want to dive into that one.
Yeah, well, then that will lead us naturally to our name, image, and likeness conversation. It needs to happen. So it's all coming together.
All right. Yeah, perfect. That'll be a really fun conversation. I'm sure that the Chick-fil-A CEO or the Chick-fil-A Bowl CEOs are going to be really excited to have these conversations about fixing college football's calendar, which makes for a truly insane month for the coaching staff, which that was my final question of the 5 that I had this week. Is like, between finishing up the signing class, name, image, and likeness, transfer portal, Kevin Wilson leaving, it's like that was just 3 days last week. Right. Like juggling it all is crazy. And these guys they don't get that much time off of the course of the year just because of the way the calendars change. But boy, December specifically is when they make those big bucks, because there's not a lot of opportunity for them to take their foot off the gas.
Yeah, I do want you look at some of these photos when these coaches are on home visits, and you're like, has that guy slept in like 4 days? So maybe, yeah, I don't know. I don't think we'll get a sleepy Ryan Day. I'm sure he's like wired on Dunkin' Donuts coffee or something at this time of year. But yeah, it's I forgot, like last Monday and Tuesday felt like a month. So I can't, and like we were just casual outside observers, like waiting to see what happened. I cannot imagine being in it fully the way these guys are.
Yeah, that's going to be a no for me, dog. I'm out on that. That's I need to get some sleep. These guys keep me up at night anyway, so I don't know if I could handle that, but I'll keep covering it because I love to, and it beats doing just about anything else. We'll be back in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center to do just that for OhioState.Rivals.com and the podcast later on Tuesday. There'll be the return of some Snappy Jays with Berm. We're ready. It's getting closer. The Peach Bowl, Ohio State, Georgia, another day closer. For Bill, I'm Austin. This is the Podcast Daily for Tuesday. We will talk to you later.